Hi guys, today we're going to be doing a lens review of the Canon 17 to 40mm f4 USM lens. And I'm going to start right now. What is up guys, Photo Fever here and welcome back to the channel. And if it's your first time here guys and you want to learn all about Photoshop, Lightroom and everything photography related, start now by subscribing and hitting the bell so you guys don't miss anything. So today we are going to be doing a lens review on one of Canon's oldest but also cheapest L lenses on the market, the Canon 17 to 40mm f4 USM lens. But is it worth the price, or should you buy one of the more modern lenses that has new features like image stabilization? Let's find out in this review. So the first thing I want to talk about guys is the build quality and the design of this lens. And I must say, as soon as you pick this lens up, you really see how well made this lens is. I must say it's got a premium plastic and metal construction with a metal mount. Now this is good because it keeps the weight down, but it also feels really, really premium. I must say all of the L lenses that I've ever tested have got the same build quality and it is absolutely top notch and you couldn't expect anything more. Now what's great about this lens is it comes with all of the features that you expect an L lens to offer. So it's obviously got a focus window. You've also got a really handy focus button. It's really annoying, I see. A lot of new lenses don't have an autofocus to manual focus button. And it's something that I just wish other lenses offer. But this lens does, which is really great. And then obviously you've got two rings here. So the ring closest towards you is the zoom ring and it's nice and smooth and well damped. And then at the top here, you've got the focus ring, which again is nice and smooth and well damped. And what's great about it is you've got full-time manual focus, which doesn't mean if you're in autofocus mode or if you're in manual focus mode, you can always change the focus, which is really, really handy. And it's something I absolutely love with all of the modern Canon lenses. Now, what's great about the design of this lens, especially over other lenses, like for instance, the 24 to 70 lens, is it is internally zoomed, which means it doesn't necessarily extend when you go ahead and zoom in or zoom out. So for instance, we're at 17mm here. If we go ahead and zoom to 40mm, you can see the lens hasn't got any longer, which is great if you're planning on wanting to use this lens for, let's say, any video, because you can place it on a gimbal without necessarily changing the balance when you go ahead and zoom in and zoom out, which is really, really handy. So because of that, I'm actually going to be giving this lens a 9 out of 10 because this lens really is a great lens for build quality. So next guys, let's talk about the all-important image quality. How well does this lens perform when you compare it to newer lenses such as the Canon 16 to 35mm f4 and f2.8 that they offer? So I went to a brand new village popping up right next to where I live and I wanted to take some more architecture and landscape shots because if you're going to be buying a 17 to 40mm, you're probably going to be interested in at least landscape, portrait, or maybe even architecture photography because it is a great wide angle lens. Now this lens zooms from 17mm, which is an ultra wide angle look, to 40mm, which is more of a standard look, a little bit of a wide angle, but to be honest, it's closer to 50mm than anything else. Now, I went to go ahead and tested a few shots on some of the brand new houses to kind of compare a lot of the angles and lines to see how bad the distortion is. Now, I went ahead and looked at the center of the image and I thought it was incredibly sharp, wide open at f4. But as soon as I went ahead to the corners, you could really see how soft and incredibly low contrast they were. Now, I wasn't sure if this was me, so I tried it in a few other locations and the same result popped up. And I must say, I was not happy with the result in the corners. It was incredibly soft. Now, I did step down to f8 and it did rectify the issue, but the problem was I was shooting at so low shutter speed, so I ended up needing a tripod because this lens does not offer image stabilization. For instance, the 16 to 35mm f4 that has the same aperture offers image stabilization. It's something that I always rely on. So having a lens with f4 and no image stabilization means you're gonna be needing to use a tripod more often than not. Now let's do a distortion and vignetting test. And at 17mm, you can see there is quite bad barrel distortion. And that's because 17mm is incredibly wide angle. I am actually really close to the actual graph here, but I must say the 16 to 35mm, the modern version of this lens, did actually outperform this lens when it comes to barrel distortion and vignetting. So I must say this lens didn't perform well in this regard, and you're gonna have to fix a lot of these lines in post, either using Photoshop or Lightroom, because the lines can be quite distorted, especially if you're shooting anything architecture related, where straight lines are really important. So if you're gonna use this lens, make sure to fix all the lines in post. Otherwise, I'd probably recommend the 16 to 35mm because that is a really good lens for architecture photography. Now for the all-important bokeh test, and let's compare it with Baby Groot here. So as you can see, at 17mm, it is very difficult to blow out the background, and that's because we're shooting at such a wide angle. The minimum focal distance of this lens is 28 centimeters, so you can get really, really close, but the problem is it's very difficult to blow out the background. If you are wanting to kind of really separate your subject, you're gonna have to shoot at anything more than roughly 35mm. Here's a shot at 40mm, and you can see Baby Groot is completely separated from the background. So it is possible, it is just very difficult with this lens. But I must say, I wasn't necessarily happy with the pure image quality of this lens. There was, to be honest, quite bad distortion, quite bad vignetting. The chromatic aberration was all over the place, magenta and green lines popping up all over the place with all the high contrast edges. So I must say, I wasn't impressed with this lens's performance, but the sharpness in the center was okay. So because of that, guys, I'm going to be giving it a 7 out of 10 for image quality, because I was expecting more from an L lens of this price. So next, let's talk about the size and weight of this lens and compare it to the two other Canon lenses that Canon offer, the Canon 16 to 35mm f2.8 and f4IS equivalent. So this Canon 17 to 40mm comes in at 500 grams, which is one of the lightest full frame wide angle lenses that Canon offer. And it is actually really small and lightweight, and it's by far the lightest and smallest wide angle lens that Canon currently produce. The next that comes is the 16 to 35mm f4. Now this, grant you, is the same aperture, but this lens does offer image stabilization, but it is ever so slightly heavier, coming in at 615 grams. Now this lens is, grant you, roughly the same weight, but it is a little bit larger, as you can see by this photo. So if you are after a really small, lightweight lens, the 17 to 40mm is by far the smallest. And lastly comes the 16 to 35mm f2.8, which is no surprise because it has a lot brighter aperture of f2.8, although this lens does not offer image stabilization. And this lens comes in at 790 grams. So you can really see it is almost 250 grams heavier than this lens, even though it offers roughly the same focal length. So if you are after a really small, lightweight lens, the 17 to 40mm is going to be ideal. So for that reason, I'm going to be giving it a 9 out of 10 for size and weight. So next, let's talk about the image stabilization and focus motor. Now, what's really disappointing with this lens, and to be honest, it just shows you how old this lens is, it doesn't have image stabilization, unlike the 16 to 35mm f4, which does, and it's actually one of the very few ultra wide angle lenses that does offer it, which is one of the main reasons I purchase it, because image stabilization is really important for photography and video work. Now, because this is missing image stabilization, it's not a complete blow off, because a lot of people, for instance, use this lens on a tripod, but it is a little bit annoying if you're wanting to do more of a run and gun shoot. Having image stabilization for instance, a vlogging lens, which this would be ideal. Again, the focal length is 17 to 40, which is really good for ultra wide angle shooting, and vlogging falls between that because obviously you're at arm's length. It doesn't offer image stabilization, which, to be honest, is a little bit disappointing for a lens of this price point, especially when you compare it to other lenses from the similar price point that Sigma or Tamron offer that does have image stabilization. So enough of image stabilization, let's talk about the focus motor. Well, it's an ultrasonic focus motor, which means it's ultra quiet and really, really precise. The only problem I found was it did struggle at nighttime shooting. If I was shooting at f8, I found it did seem to hunt around a lot. So I ended up shooting predominantly on manual mode, and then I relied on my kind of focusing using my focus peaking of my Canon 7D to really nail in that focusing. So overall, I wasn't impressed by the focus motor, and again, the lack of image stabilization I really did struggle with, which is one of the main reasons why I brought the 16 to 35mm, and it's a lens that I highly recommend, and I've actually got the review just up here for that lens. So overall, I was not impressed. So because of that, I'm only going to be giving this lens a 6 out of 10 for image stabilization and focus motor control. And last but most importantly is the price. How well is this lens priced versus the newer lenses on the market? Well, coming in at £779, this is one of the cheapest L lenses you can purchase, But compared to the Sigma and Tamron lenses that they offer, this lens is incredibly expensive. And I must say, I would not necessarily recommend this lens brand new. It's quite an old lens now, but Canon still make them brand new. So if anything, I would recommend second-hand lenses that come at a way better price point. I found one in really good condition, a 9 condition on Wex Photo Video's website, only coming in at £306, which is a lot better value for money. I definitely wouldn't buy this lens necessarily brand new. Now next comes the Canon 16 to 35mm f4 IS lens. Now this is one of my favourite ultra wide angle lenses, mostly because it's got a good aperture of f4, it's not too dark and not too light, but it also offers image stabilisation, which this lens is missing, and only coming in for a little bit more brand new, coming in at £1,109. Now this is quite expensive, grant you, for a lens, but I must say for what you're getting, I use this lens almost all of the time, and I would say it is highly recommended. And last but not least on my list is the 16 to 35mm f2.8. This is by far one of the most expensive wide angle lenses you can purchase, although it does offer a really handy focal length at 16 to 35mm at the aperture of constant f2.8. And this lens comes in at £2,199, by far the most expensive lenses that we are looking at today. So you can really see that this 17 to 40mm, unless you buy it used, this is going to be very, very expensive, and you're not necessarily getting the best image quality for the price. So overall, I was not impressed with the price of this lens. Unless you're getting it used, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this lens. So because of that, I'm only going to be giving this lens a 4 out of 10 for price, because there are way better options out there, and you can save yourself a hell of a lot of money if you get this lens used. So what are my final thoughts on this lens, and should you buy the 17 to 40mm over the 16 to 35mm? Well, to be honest, the answer is yes and no. If you're comparing brand new to brand new, to be honest, there's no shadow of a doubt I would recommend the 16 to 35mm f4, mostly because you're getting way better image quality, but most importantly, you're getting that image stabilization, which for me is absolutely key. Having an aperture of f4, which isn't necessarily very bright, you want that image stabilization to really help you get those really sharp images, because you're going to be having a lower shutter speed, unless you want to use a tripod for every single shot. That's why I wouldn't necessarily recommend this lens for anything video related, although it really does have a really handy internal zoom focusing system. Now, if you're comparing brand new to used, then no shadow of a doubt, I'd recommend the 17 to 40mm, because you're going to be able to get way better value for money, because you'll be able to get this lens for almost a third of the price of the 16 to 35mm. But again, they do still make this lens used, and that's what I'm going to be comparing in this video. So let's have a look at the final results. Well, at the moment, you can see it only comes in at 35 out of 50, which is granting you a recommended lens, but there are way better options out there when you do compare the 16 to 35mm. So I can't necessarily recommend this lens when you are looking at between these two lenses. I would just say bite the bullet, get the 16 to 35mm, and you're going to be incredibly happy. But if you're on a budget and you don't necessarily want to spend a heap of money, the 17 to 40mm is still a really, really good lens, especially if you get it used, because you're going to get yourself a heap of money. And I must say, this lens is actually quite good for the price. Again, guys, if you want to like, comment, and subscribe for my channel, it really does help my channel grow. Also, if you want to hit the bell notification, so you guys don't miss anything. But until next time, guys, keep creating.